an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Immortal Great Souls series, Book 2, The Rascor Plains, chapters 27 through 31. In these chapters, I feel really, really bad that we're sending people on seduction missions now. Bless her heart. She did her best. Also, things continue to be going so well that I'm nervous about it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Also, no pressure or anything, but I did want to give a shout out to the great and glorious author of this series, Phil Tucker, who is evidently listening to the show. Phil, just so you know, I am not going to go easy on you just because I know that you're listening now. It's an instinct to do that, but I'm not going to do it. So I hope that you don't get your feelings hurt if I say something snotty, but don't take it to heart because there's plenty of snotty things to be said about me also. So you guys, these chapters, oh my God. Oh, it's so awkward. Y'all, I did not know where we were going with this. When Ravenna shows up, my instinct at first was, is she about to start hitting on him? And I thought it was going to be a kind of like, oh, yeah, you know how these bitches be. They don't want nothing to do with you until you come up. And then all of a sudden, they're all up your ass. And I was like, well, as much as that's an unfortunate stereotype about women in general, there is truth to that with just people who don't want anything to do with you until they see that you're successful. So I wouldn't have been too mad about it if we were doing that. And in a way, it is that, weirdly, but it's like, it's not her choice. And I found it really endearing in a way, how much she kind of gives in after a moment. He has to kind of push her to stop, but once she does, she's just like, oh dude, I knew I was not going to be good at this. I will say it is a really deeply uncomfortable series of scenes though. So the first one is him and Ravenna talking and drinking. And he is pretty straightforward. And I'm curious about y'all if you would do this as well. He really comes out of the gate with her being like, oh, to old friends. And just is like, we're not friends. We never fucking talked ever. This is the most we have ever spoken to one another. And honestly, I kind of respect it. Like, there's a part of me that was surprised that he just said it. Because this is the sort of thing that you think to yourself when you're having a conversation with somebody, but you don't actually like come out and go, what the fuck? Why are we acting like we're buds all of a sudden, And sometimes there is no ulterior motive. And it's just that like circumstances wound up so that you were near each other during a party or at an event or whatever. And they're just trying to like be easy with you in a way that feels familiar, like sometimes too familiar right away, but they think that's going to make things less awkward in the long term. And then there are people who they come in real hot because they want something. So she is mentioning that Octavia had wanted her to recruit him to Kraken. And he says, do you think I should accept? And she says, I'd be disappointed if you did. And I thought that was really interesting. I have such paranoia, you guys, about like, who's listening to this conversation? Is she going to get in trouble for saying this shit? Like later on when she confesses what's really up, a part of me was sort of like, do they know how freely she's talking, like how much are they able to monitor her, and also how much of what she says, even when it feels like she's let her guard down and is telling the truth, is she? It's very easy to set up somebody and make them think, oh, the first thing was a lie, but the second thing, once you get past the lie, that's the truth. But a really good con artist sets it up so that the first thing and the second thing are a lie. And you just take the second thing because you really feel like you broke past some barrier, you know? I don't really feel like that seems like her style, though. So I am going to take it at face value for right now. Um, so she's like essentially saying, I was just about good enough for House Kraken. And he replies with that she was no slouch. And she comes back with this description of what happened here. This was, I had described her defeat at Jova's hands as humiliating. And I felt a little bad about saying it that way at the time because when Scorio thinks about her defeat, I don't feel like he is that harsh in his judgment. And it may be because he has since seen what Jova is working with in that like fear department. And so he can't blame anybody for the reaction, you know? Um, but when he's talking about, you know, whether or not she's feeling like satisfied with everything, she's essentially saying, I'm doing the best I can, but I kind of fucked up. Um, and she says, let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where exactly she begins talking about this. Oh yeah, she says, you're the man of the hour and you made quite the impression on me when you told Praximar to go to the pit. Um, And she starts pushing him about whether or not he is involved with anybody. When she says something about there being an attraction between him and Jova, he kind of, I couldn't tell if it was a like overreaction because it's maybe there's a little truth to it, or if it's an overreaction because it truly is that ludicrous to him. But there's I thought it was interesting that like it's really Jova that she focuses on, and she doesn't bring up Leonchi. And I'm not sure, guys. I think that maybe Leonchi is just gay and not like bi or pan. So I think she's completely off the table. I don't believe though that Ravenna mentions Naomi at all. And if I were going to be like putting my money on anybody that he might eventually get involved with, I would think it would be Naomi. I don't need it to be, just to be clear. I am not somebody who needs romance, particularly in stories. If it's done well, fine. But a lot of the time it's not, and it's just really tedious. So I'm just saying what I would sort of see as being the most compatible. Um, let's see. Uh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm just trying to find the spot where where she begins talking about this because I feel like I must have gone past it without even noticing. Um, I am still but an emberling throwing my stones at targets I can't define. I'm not even sure what the questions should be. Um, we have choices of joining a house, receive praise and treasures, promises of Imperium and the pit, to gaze vacuously at the puppet show while ignoring what's really going on behind the curtain. And it was kind of up in the air for me whether she means this whole thing with what is going on with Hell and Bastion, or whether she meant the politics of Bastion specifically. You know, I don't know. Um, I think that, you know what I'm realizing as I'm looking at this conversation, I think that she doesn't open up and talk about her failures until later after their encounter in her apartment. So I am going to wait until I get there to talk about it. Um, but yeah, so they eventually she does the how lucky are you, Scorio? Do you think you're lucky enough? Do you want to get luckier? And I was really not sure how to take it, guys. I'm really curious how you all felt as you were reading this. Because my first response was, is she fucking with him? It just felt so over the top. And this writer does not tend to write corny ass dialogue, right? Like, I feel like he is very good at saying things that even feel like, if you were to say them in different words, can sound very trite, perhaps, but he manages to find different words so that even if it's a familiar um, sentiment, it will hit differently as you're reading it. So it just was so kind of clunky. And I was like, okay, either she is really out of her depth or like kind of forcing it because she is trying for something with Scorio that is purely based on advantage. Or alternatively, it could be that because we haven't really had any sort of like sexual encounters in the story so far, maybe we're getting our first look at the way he writes these encounters and it's not great. Like, I got a little nervous because this is really, there's been mention of sex, but it's not really even like explicitly mentioned. It's alluded to, it's implied, but it's not more than that. And there has been very little even of Scorio being like attracted to anybody. There's a couple brief mentions about his eyes being drawn often to like a particular woman or whatever. But so, there are plenty of authors out there that they write quite well right up until the point that we start to go into sex. And then it's like, oh God, sweetie, just don't, I'm looking at you, George R. R. Martin. Um, so I had like a little bit of oh no, like, I guess we just have to go with this and see which one it is. So they run off toward her place, and there is this moment where they like get stopped in the rain. This was so funny because it felt very on the nose to me. And I can't tell if this was her or if it was like just happenstance. Um, the sun wire cooled abruptly, and the spiral storm clouds broke into revolving curtains of rain. Now, I will freely admit, guys, that I had not even remembered that it could rain in Bastion. And I don't remember exactly how that works. The spiral storm clouds, I believe, rotate around the sun wire, perhaps? But anyway, so yeah, this moment in the rain, her face is turned up to it and she's looking really good. And then she leans over and kisses him. And I also should mention that, like, throughout their conversation, there is a servant standing right there who's got this nice, like, exclusive vintage of gold manna beverage. And Scorio is getting sauced. And I kept being like, dude, slow down. He's drinking so fast. I am not a big drinker myself. So even when I'm trying to like get a buzz on, I can't go fast because I am such a lightweight and it makes me sick really quickly. And the way that he was going into it, I was like, dude, what are you doing? And then to find out that like part of that was a setup, and it's a real fine line because she's not shoving the drinks into his hands. She's not insisting that he drink. There's not a drug that's pushing him past where he intended to be in terms of his like capacity. But he is being watched by a servant waiting with a fresh glass. It's pushing him to finish the glass a little faster than he might otherwise. So there's a real, like, kind of gross element here of trying to affect his judgment. So he's dealing with that, and then they go into her apartment, and he notices how the place is very dark and small. It doesn't feel personal. There's no touches around the place like there was at, like, Naomi's, for example. Um, and he has this, oh God, is this a trap? And of course, it being a trap had occurred to me, but I didn't want that to be what it was, because there's just so many other ways you could trap him, you know? So it turns out it's not. She's standing next to her bed, and she's just wearing a undershift that's practically transparent. And when he looks around and realizes there's nobody else here, that there isn't an attack, because he was like psyching himself up, like ready, and then all of a sudden that's not what's happening anymore. She comes up to him, pushes him against the bed so that, like, it hits the back of his knees, and he sinks down. His mouth felt parched. He yearned for her, but when he pulled, she drew back. With his dark vision, he could see her expression with perfect clarity. Her smile was conflicted, her brow furrowed. What is it? Nothing. She took a sharp breath. Nothing. Let me get a drink. She drew back, extracted her hand, and left the room. So then there was, okay, did she just leave him so that somebody else can come in and find him in his moment of vulnerability here? But when she really is getting a drink, I was like, okay, she just doesn't want to do this. And thankfully, he is able to figure that out as well. Her hand is shaking, and, like, she's just had this lovely booze, and it didn't fuck her up enough. She has to have some other, like, real well drink type shit, bottom shelf, in order to get her to the place where she's going to go for it again. That's not a great sign. We're not okay. So he stops her and says, is something wrong? Did I do something? And she's like, no, I'm not at all. You're perfect. I want you here. Let me show you how much. No, wait, this feels, what happened? A second ago you were, and now I just had a moment. It's nothing. Scorio, you've what? She gave a hiccuping laugh. I've dreamt of this moment since I first set eyes on you. It sounded utterly insincere. Ravenna. That's a bald-faced lie. Oh, that is so great. I love it so much. I love it so much. Do you know how many dudes her saying that? It would just be a wrap. Y'all don't even understand. Like, it is so... this is why I always used to be like, when I was younger, very younger, and I found out that men go to strip clubs or pay for sex. And granted, women go to strip clubs, women pay for sex, but it's a very different, it's just so proportionally more men. I was always really puzzled because I was like, you've got these gorgeous women pretending to like you. They're pretending. You are giving them money for them to act like they're interested. Doesn't that kind of ruin it? Like, so much of what I enjoyed about sex was feeling like I was attractive to my partner. Like, they couldn't keep their hands off me, And so to me, the idea of, like, having to give them money for them to behave as if they're at all interested, it was just baffling, And then as I grew up, I just began to realize, like, how immediately dudes will forget they're paying for it. Like, it's just a kind of, like, weird disconnect where it's like, yeah, sure, I put like $80 in her G-string, but I think she really likes me, for real. Bruh, come back to Earth, okay? I'm not mad at you for wishing, but can we please just be real for a second and admit she's trying for a C note and that's all it is? Like, can we just be real about the transaction here? And of course, we can't, because that's part of why these businesses work, right? Is that dudes can think for a moment that it's like really about them and not about the transaction. But like if you when you are in the position where you're attempting to seduce a guy, a lot of the time they're just willing to accept whatever you tell them because they just want to fuck, and that's all there is to it, you know? So the fact that he is here just kind of going, okay, stop, stop, stop. That is some real self-control. And it really speaks to the fact that Scorio isn't somebody who just wants to fuck to fuck. Granted, he is feeling lust. It's not like he is immune to that, but the lust gets interrupted by him realizing that his partner is not being straight up with him. And, you know, again, for some people, it would not be a problem. Whether or not she seemed truly interested anymore, it would be a closed case to them. I'm in her apartment. She's almost naked. We're both drunk. It's on. Oh, well. And I just appreciate so much that he is like wanting to connect on a real level enough that he's like, okay, well, no, not now. And finally, she's like, for a moment, I felt not myself. It's gone now. Come on, let's just relax and enjoy each other's. And she's pushing him and trying to undress him. And he finally has to shove her off him and say, stop. And then she cracks. And it's just like, oh, I told them I was not going to be good at this. So they go out onto the balcony. And he's like, so it was Octavia that wanted you. And she's like, the doy. And she's like, look, I'm House Kraken. We met in the academy. I'm pretty. That's all that went into this. Staff was instructed to hover close by with drinks, golden elixirs that weren't being served to anyone else. As a tomb spark, you were supposed to need twice as much to lose your judgment, but I guess 3 or 4 drinks were enough. That's interesting. I have to assume that's to do with his like damaged heart. But she just basically called him a lightweight. And then what? We go at it all night and I sign up in the morning? Octavia was casting a wide net. She didn't rule out your growing infatuated with me, though at her suggestion I laughed. But I was meant to ask you about your meetings with the White Queen, if you spoke with Moira, why were you choosing Manticore, what might sway you joining Kraken, and at the very least, ensure you became invested in one of House Kraken's members. Damn it. I'm sorry. I told them I was the wrong candidate for the job. They didn't give me much of a choice. And you still want to be part of their house? My house. I swore a heart oath. And he looks at her and I was like, for a moment, kind of wondering, why is he having such a strong reaction? And I guess a heart oath to join a house is unusual. The fact that, you know, like you usually, I think it's just contracts. You sign papers, you probably make an oath of a type. But I guess a heart oath is not de jour. I don't know if I'm even saying that right. Thanks, Poirot. Here it is. Thank you. Oh, I was looking for it. I'm not like you, Scorio. Whenever you're knocked down, you just get back up. But after my fight with Jova... And he finally says, Jova showed me what her power can do. It's overwhelming. Yeah. I saw her whenever I closed my eyes. I couldn't sleep for a week. Nearly fell apart. You don't know how important sleep is till you can't get it. So I lost my fire, I guess. I don't know. I felt humiliated, exhausted, and the very fact that I'd lost my will to train made me feel all the more like a failure. a downward spiral, I suppose you'd call it. Ravenna, I'm sorry. Don't be. I didn't reach out to help you. Why should you do the same for me? I came in 178th in the final gauntlet run. Not bad, enough that I could continue at the academy, but when Octavia singled me out and made me feel special, made me feel seen again, well, I didn't care what she made me swear so that I could join her house. And this is just something that I really do understand. Look, I am not exactly. There's a difference, I think, between being like a perfectionist and being competitive. I am not necessarily somebody who's like, I want to beat everybody else because I feel like driven to crush competition. It's more like I am driven to beat other people at things because I know that most people don't pay attention to details, and I know that I am capable of that, and that winning a lot of things is within my reach. And I'm just like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to fucking do it, you know? But it's not really like it's much more about my own desire to like get things exactly right than it is about like if I am able to do exactly what I want for a project and achieve what was in my mind's eye and really feel satisfied, even if I don't get like first prize, I'm still going to be pretty happy because I did the thing and I'm good with it, you know? However, they are linked a lot of the time in a way that kind of can't be avoided. And combine that with just being embarrassed at the way that you like she sprinted out of that fucking ring, right? She like immediately took off, and the thing about it is that nobody else could see what she saw. So it just kind of looked like she freaked out. And I'm sure everybody came to the conclusion that it was that Jova had some sort of fear ability, you know? But still, it looks really bad, especially when you were in like second or, you know, she was like high up on the list for potentially beating the gauntlet run. And then the fact that Jova's ability got into her head that bad, like Scorio was thinking maybe it's because she's an Emberling that it lasted so long. I'm not sure. I kind of wonder if it's not more about who you are as a person, how it affects you. I'm sure that what level you have advanced to is a factor. I'm certain that it does matter. But I can't help but wonder if there's more personality involved than anything. Um, because like Scoria was just somebody who was so driven to get past obstacles that I could see him just being like, all right, well, I'm going to find a way to push through, you know, and that just being part of his nature. And if you have your whole identity wrapped up in doing really well, and then you get fucked up like this, it can really start to be like, well, then what the fuck am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? If I'm not the person at the top of the list who's a real contender that other people are like looking to be intimidated by, why am I doing this? And then the fact that like she lost her will to train, you see your it's almost like she sank into a depression, you know, and lost interest. It's fascinating because I don't know if Jova's aware that, not to say that her loss of will is the fault of Jova's ability, but I can't help but kind of wonder, you know? It may not be. It may simply be a result of losing that much sleep. A week of sleep, that is fucking serious. She's right that you don't know how important it is till you can't get it. She is correct. As somebody living with a man who has a sleep disorder, let me tell you, it will ruin your life. So it could just be that, but I don't know. Um, so finally he asks her, do you want to leave? And she's like, of course I do. But they've got their fucking oaths locked down. They know how to write these things so that there is no getting out of it. And he gives her a list of shit that he was told was impossible that he managed to do. And he's like, look, if you want to get out, you have got to make it happen. And she kind of has an emotional reaction that she tamps down and then says, if Octavia is the only one who can release me, then I need to earn her favor and earn enough political capital that I can demand it as my reward. Scorio hesitated, but then bit back his protest. He didn't know the nature or extent of her oaths. And I really kind of felt like this was, Scorio's a brute force kind of guy. She's looking at doing this in a much more like diplomatic, political way. That is not Scorio's approach to things. So on the surface, it could just be that he's just like, well, that's not the way I do it, but I guess, However, I don't think that the person you are beholden to, I don't feel like you should look to them for the way out of a thing. It just feels like that's not going to work out for you. And maybe that's not fair, but I feel like it is. They didn't put her in a hard oath for nothing. So she then says, well, if I need to earn her favor, is there anything that you can tell me that is like a kind of inside information that would be valuable to her and make me look good? And she offers to give him something in return. So he tells her about Praximar. He's got a connection with House Basilisk. They steal high-quality mana for him from the Sky Yards, use regular criminals from the poor wards to do this. Ravenna didn't look as gratified as he'd hoped. How did you discover this? I was one of those criminals at first. Oh, yes, thank you. Yes. And that got me a little worried because, look, I know that Scorio has mentioned already to Chimera that he is the one who stole it. I'm sure that this is kind of like out there already, but there was a feeling for me of almost like, well, that's no info against Praximar, but that's some info against you, so that might be useful. Like, did she know about the Praximar thing? There's a real vibe here of like old news, or a suspicion of it. Or, well, yeah, Olivia does that, or Octavia does that. So, like, everybody apparently, it's not a big deal. It just really felt like telling her they're stealing high quality mana is the equivalent of like, well, they take bribes with like a senator. Fucking duh, they take bribes. Are you kidding me? What good is this? Do you have actual conversations? Do you have an email chain? Do you have some screenshots of texts? Like anything? No? Well, what good is it? Um, and what she tells him in response, Octavia reports to Charnel Duke Placis, who acts as the primary liaison between Broick the Brawler in Deep Hell and Bastion. Something's wrong with Placis. Octavia is hard to read, but I've overheard enough, and I don't know. I've gotten the impression she's growing increasingly frustrated. He's not reacting as he should. He's trapped, not physically, but like a game of chess where he's checked and isn't doing what he should. And Scorio's kind of like, I don't know what good this is going to do me, but I guess I'll just hang on to it. So there's still a moment here where Scorio is like feeling a little bit frisky and looks at her and has to take a moment. And she's like, look, it was fun for a little bit. I'm sorry that I couldn't completely go through with it. And the atmosphere between them tenses again. It occurs to me that since I've placed all my cards on the table, there's no longer any room for misunderstanding of why we're both here. With politics out of the way, what's left? Just the two of us and a long, long night. And she kisses him. And for a moment, he's almost like, all right. But he stops and he's like, I don't think it's a good idea. And she's just like, all right, cool. Well, You can come in with me if you want. But he leaves via the balcony, jumps off. And it made me laugh because once you found out that somebody was like that full of shit, I could see that you can't turn around and just be like, doesn't matter, you know? It depends. Some people probably could. Depends on your personality, I guess. But for me, I want to be able to like really let go during sex, and I won't feel like comfortable to be vulnerable with somebody that I know was lying to my face very recently. Um, so Scorio is walking the streets of Bastion for the rest of the night, and he is very surprised at the way that everybody is celebrating in the streets. And there's like people dancing and handing out pastries and like, you know, kind of the equivalent of sort of fireworks, things like that. And he's just sort of like feeling off. It's nice to see, but it's not giving him the same satisfaction that he had been feeling. And he starts asking himself, was this enough? What was this what he'd been fighting for? What did he hunger for now? And I love this. He thinks, what do I hunger for? He thought of Ravenna's long, athletic legs, the taste of her lips against his own, the angular press of her hip against his thigh. And I was just like, oh, okay. What do I hunger for? Pussy. That's what I hunger for. But I've got to think longer term, Scorio. He's like mentally slapping himself. Um, so he winds up back at the ruins. And it's not like he meant to go. He just sort of wanders and finds himself there. And it's an interesting moment because being there makes him remember what it felt like when he was first attempting to ignite and how intensely driven he was. And it's just, it says so little time had passed, but already he felt a stranger to that youth. He could accept the Iron Tyrant's offer. He could strive to join Manticore. Hell, he could dictate terms to Octavia, but what did he want? And time stretched by. He closed his eyes. It felt almost like being home. And he drinks in some coal mana. And all of a sudden, here's Nox. And it turns out that Nox can like feel when he burns coal and sense that he's nearby because of him being in like Nox's Imperial gel. And evidently, Quantix has been working quite well for Nox. Talk about drowning in pussy. Nox is getting it. He is very happy. So he's feeling, I think, even more friendly towards Scorio probably than he used to. And I'm trying to find, because when he tells him to dominate the spawning pool, and I was just like, Jesus Christ. He says, I used to know what I wanted. I was hungry for power, for victory, for validation, maybe? And since we last spoke, I've achieved a good amount. Now I'm not certain. I don't feel the same drive. And Nox says Nox lives for gorging on mana, but after good meal, Nox not desire maximum gorging for a few sunwire cycles. Nox find quiet corner, take nap. Then, when Nox wake up, desire maximum gorging once more. You're saying I've just had a good meal and need to digest it? Spiritual stomach is full, must digest, soon hungry again. When day arrives, you no longer hunger. Then time to rampage into spawning pools. Time for Quantix. Bless him. And he thinks to himself, well, maybe Jova and Naomi, like, they don't understand him feeling satisfaction because the things that he had set out to do aren't the things that they particularly care about. And this was something that I had not mentioned in the last chapters when we were talking about the argument between Jova and Scorio. I was very focused on the ways in which they each had a point, but I don't think, give enough voice to just the sheer Scorio does get to be satisfied. I totally get that you can get high on yourself, but I'm not even certain if that's exactly what he was doing. Like, I think maybe he was, but also you get to feel proud of things you've done. You can feel a moment of like, I am going to take a moment and rest on my laurels a little bit. You've got to be careful about doing that too much. But the way that Jova is, reacting, it's difficult because for me, it's only been like, so many chapters since we decided that we were going to go on to the plains and find the White Queen and yada yada. And for them, a good amount of time has passed. And all it was the White Queen and that mission. So for Jova, it feels very much like we have spent a lot of time on this, dude. Can we please do the thing now? And so I'm trying to keep that in mind, even though part of me feels like getting out onto the plains the way they did anyway, it's still helping them toward their ultimate goal, even if they weren't on that mission at the time. It's showing them what to expect, where things are, how stuff works. And I think that's really valuable to do with a guide. So, otherwise you're just going to be wandering around, not knowing what you're even looking for. So part of me kind of did in that convo want him to ask, like, what does she want to do next then? What does she suggest? But I got sidetracked, as I so often do. So yeah, and I think maybe he's right. It's Naomi and Jova both have really, really different goals and priorities. And I am not surprised that something that feels pretty major to him, the two of them just can't really understand it. It's surprising to me a little bit more that maybe Naomi might not understand, but she's not the one that's getting in his face about it. So that may not even apply here. So this is when he asks Knox, so what are you up to? And he's like, yeah, I think I might be leaving soon. He says, how are you getting out of Bastion? And he says, I'll take the tunnels. And Scorio is like, the what now? You can just come and go as you like through the tunnels? All fiends can? And Nox is like, yeah, but not many people want to because there's nothing here, dude. And that was so funny to me. We're out here acting like we're battling to keep Bastion safe, and meanwhile, all these fiends out there are like, hard pass. No thanks. I'm good. What? Scorio, it's like he got flicked between the eyes. He's like, I thought we were. Wait, hold on. He calls it Archerzua, or maybe Archerzua. That is the actual like title of hell. Evidently, it's got a name. It may not even be hell. I don't know. So Nox is here because even though other beings sort of disdain coal mana, Nox doesn't. He's like, this shit's good, and nobody else comes here, so I can just set up shop and basically have it all to myself. It's great. Then why are we fighting? Scorio and Nox not fighting? Best friends! Sorry, I meant great souls and denizens in general. We are not fighting. Nox is Imperial Ghost Toad. We only engorge and then seek to practice Quantix. Do you know of the Viridian Heart, Javalink's dying dreamer? No. Oh, I guess you wouldn't have run into them back there. And so Scoria was just like, okay, how does this make sense? And how is it that, like, at the academy, this hasn't been mentioned? And I'm like, ooh, making up an enemy that doesn't really exist to get everybody motivated to fight a fight that isn't really, like, having anything to do with them. Are we gonna talk about mana like it's oil fields? Is this Iraq? Like, what are we doing? It feels very historically relevant. The United States is a mess. So he takes off and goes and meets back up with his friends. Um, he is really hungover the next day, and Leonis is assuming, understandably, that Scorio got laid last night. And so he starts this speech. You guys, I have to read this because this is so funny. Oh my God. Last night, Scorio emerged from his swaddling clothes to climb the buxom slopes of that steep and sacred mountain, whose olive groves shelter secrets only grown men can guess at, and where he quenched his thirst from that sweet wellspring that burbles up from the hidden grotto, to emerge steely-eyed and square-jawed, a man, by the gods, a man at last. Oh my God. That sweet wellspring that burbles up from the hidden grotto. Oh my Lord in heaven. And so Scorio has to tell him nothing happened. And of course, Leonis at first thinks it's like, oh, you couldn't get it up because you got too drunk, buddy. I'm so sorry. Never had that problem, but I've heard of it. And he has to be like, no, no, no. There was just a misunderstanding. And then finally, he manages to change the subject to Nox. Um, and he brings up the fact that there are tunnels leading out of hell, and they get cut off. And he's cut off by Nissa coming up. And I was a little bit worried that, like, look, I don't like Nissa. I was going to say it. I was trying to find, like, a diplomatic way to say this. And then I was like, no, you know what? I'm just going to fucking use the words. I don't like her. Ooh, my mic just moved. Sorry if that sounded crazy on the recording, guys. Nissa, she is just, she doesn't care about people. She's just trying to get by. And to a point, I can respect that, but she is just really uncaring in a way that I don't understand. And the fact that she was there when he's talking about these tunnels makes me worried in a way that I can't quite pinpoint. And also, she's got a look in her eyes. So she asks him, can we talk for a second? Everything is going according to plan. Abentha wants to know which street or avenue your group is planning to use to leave Bastion. And he doesn't want to say it first, but then he finally does. And he's like, I'm just being paranoid. We'll return to the Manticore Church House and then probably take the main avenue through Ward 11. Why? A couple of people want to make sure they get to thank you before they leave. Oh. Nissa, what's wrong? Nissa's lips thinned into a grimace, and for a moment it seemed as if she might blurt something out. But then she glanced at his friends and forced a smile. Nothing. I guess I'm having trouble accepting everything's working out for the best. You sure? Whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm sure. I probably won't see you before you leave, so goodbye. And she jerked forward to hug him tightly, her chin digging into his shoulder, her clasp crushing. Yeah, all right, this bitch is in something bad. And in my opinion, the fact that she looked at his friends and then, like, recovered and said everything was fine, it is very much feeling like I am not as cool with betraying you because you are like me as a red lister, but your friends, I don't like, I don't trust. They're part of the problem. And so I need to remind myself that those people are the majority in your group. And even though it pains me to do this to you, it's for the best because they suck. And this hug is extra intense because she's feeling guilty and she knows that something is going to happen to him shortly. And he just, I need him to be more worried than he is about this. I don't like it. It's giving, they want to find a way to thank you before you leave. Really? Thank them? Like, that means many things. So, we then have the White Queen coming up and making her speech. We have this whole gathering where she tells everybody that she's eventually going to be leaving, what we have set up here. And she does the heart oaths with everybody. Leonis mentions that there's no council member from the people up there. And Leon, she says, well, they haven't been chosen yet, which is exactly how we were warned this was going to go. And it's an interesting scene because, like, again, it's all so heartfelt seeming. But I just can't help but think this queen was about to bounce. She was about to leave. I don't buy it. She's doing this because it looks away and it is costing her nothing. I think that's all it is. I don't think she gives a shit. Like, okay, look. Saying I don't think she gives a shit, that's strong. I think she cares a drop. And she's figuring, I can do this one thing because it costs me nothing, really. And probably assuages her guilt for leaving, if anything. It's like maybe more self-interested even. But I don't like it. I don't like it. And of course, Praximar has to do his fucking speech. Oh my God, this dude is so in love with the sound of his own voice. Said the podcaster who can do over an hour alone and go over time. I recognize the irony. Anyway, he, just does a sort of like reminder that we're all part of this movement that's like keeping our foes at bay. We need to work together. Just the usual horse shit. And the White Queen uses her portal and a bunch of people follow her so that eventually it really feels like quite empty on the stage. It's only half the people gone, but still. Well, Damien beamed at them all. What an honor to witness such a momentous occasion. I dare say our little crew will have to work hard to uphold the White Queen's vision as well. It will fall to all of us to maintain the peace and keep the fiends at bay. And let's see. We've already had training, protested Leonis. Not like this, you haven't. Damien's grin turned predatory. Trust me. So then we go to chapter 31. And it's interesting because it starts with the city of Bastion turned out to watch them go. No, muttered Leonis uncomfortably, to watch you go, Scorio. What? How are you responding to the narration? How does that work? Who's he talking to? What is that? I have never seen that before. Who's he responding to? It's a weird, I don't know. So everybody is watching them and there's not like cheering. It's just a real strong sense of emotion, but it's not being shown in a way that feels like what one would expect of a kind of a parade. And I love the fact that Evelyn doesn't know how to respond to this. She tries to like smile, and then she just tries to ignore them and talk to Davalos, and then she just goes silent, and she's like, there's something about this is like ungrateful. What even is, you know? And Scorio can tell that's not really fair, and he just does these nods to people. But I really understand this where there's cheering doesn't really feel right, something this solemn. And also, you guys, all things considered for me, the fact that I don't really think that a lot of what's been done is going to matter, I can't help but feel embarrassed because they're making a really big deal out of this. And not to say that Scorio didn't do what he said and put himself out there and this was all very real, but I think they're going to be looking back eventually and sort of be like, yeesh, that was not what we thought. We got all up in our feelings over something that was kind of fake, you know? I don't know. Um, so they get stopped by Abentha and Walsham. And again, people give their thanks. And like, again, maybe this is all it was. Maybe this is what Nissa was talking about, but they're just, I don't know. It may be that Nissa is just, because she is in with, is it Basilisk? She may just know that some shit is up and she can't tell him about it. She may just be more aware that stuff isn't what it looks like and she isn't allowed to tell him. It may be that simple. Um, so eventually they do cheering for Scorio and Leonis is like, didn't anyone tell them that you had help? Um, So they passed through the cordon of guards as before, descended, flipped, then ascended to the surface of the plains. Scorio was too subdued and thoughtful to take as much enjoyment of the process as last time, and it was with some surprise that he emerged into the ashen enclosure. And they head out there, and he has this moment of like, you know what? This is great. Nobody out here knows who I am. I'm getting a bit of a break. I can't imagine. I love attention. I wouldn't do this job if I didn't. But having people's eyes on you to that extent and for that long with that intensity, yeah, you need a break eventually, you know? I don't know how celebrities do it. I really don't. You know, I think about it all the time. Beyonce going out onto a stage where there's like 85,000 people and all of their attention is focused on her. Can you imagine? Like, yikes. Um, so this is when Davalos is like, you guys ready for some exercise? And he takes off. Of course, Jova is like, yeah, let's go. And poor Scorio. He knows this is going to be rough. It is indeed rough. His heart gives out ahead of everybody else's, and he just has to like struggle up the rest of it without being able to use magic, essentially. Um, and Lianshi is like, she's sort of hung back to make him look less behind, but it's not really fooling anybody because even if she came along at the same time as him, she's like barely broken a sweat. And my guy is wheezing over here. He is not okay. Oh, bless him. We're all here. Damien's question was painfully rhetorical. I love that phrase. I love it. It's such a great way to describe, like, you're acting like you're speaking in general. We know who you're fucking talking about, okay? Just ask. You finally here with us? But no, we gotta be polite and act as if we're all as having as much difficulty as each other. Shut up. Stop it. Um, so, uh, the it was I'm sorry, I'm trying to find here it is, the platform made of truly huge planks of wood, each several yards wide, their surface dented and worn by the passage of countless years. And they see the ship. Leonis's first reaction to this ship is, why is it so small? Leonis, can you please? Would you like it if anybody said that to you? Leonis? Just something to think about. Just felt really rude. And it doesn't even look that small initially. But once they are all on board, it is very clearly crowded, you know. It's the skeleton of a baby air whale. Naomi says this, clearly feeling a way about it. And I can understand that. Yeah. Um, the ship's almost 4 centuries old, a crime from the past that we would be fools to concern ourselves over, said Damien. Yeah, I guess. You're probably right, but it is hard to get past certain things. I get it. Um, and they take off into the air. Idriel, I think is how you say her name, is the one that is like sort of in charge of the ship. And I love when Simeon comes out and it's just like, all right, guys, we have harnesses for you because this is not one of those big ass ships where winds come and buffet it and it doesn't do anything. We are on this little baby and you will get tossed over. So put this on and just keep in mind that because it's so small, it's just going to be a real different experience. Um, and he says that even a little coal or iron turbulence can cause the sloop to buck or suddenly drop a dozen yards. Israel will call out warnings when she can, but it's on you to pay attention. There's no such thing as true downtime on board. Everyone nodded, mildly alarmed. I thought that was funny. Um, and then Simeon's like, but, you know, you can try and relax and enjoy things. Like, it's cool up here. Um, Leonshi raised her hand. Can you ride the sloop down into the chasm's depths? Oh ho, grinned Simeon. We've got an intrepid spirit here. The sloop's bones navigate copper best, though they can sink with effort through iron. Can't descend through stronger mana, however. Imagine trying to drown a full-grown tree. So what would happen if you just kept sailing south? The ship would just float higher and higher once it reached the mass of bronze man until you beached on the upper ethers like a boat on shore. I think. Nobody's tried it in centuries since it's known it can't be done. Or since it's known it can be done. And Leonis cues Scorio sailing a whale ship to the pit. And I was like, honestly, that was exactly what I was thinking. I really, as soon as he's like, well, nobody's done it in a while, I was like, oh boy, here we go. And I may be completely wrong about that, but it is sort of anytime anybody is just like, we don't really do that. I'm like, all right, Scorio, go do that. Go ahead, get it out of your system. Um, and it ends with Simeon saying, everybody eager to get started? That way we can hit the ground running when we arrive, which, seeing as we'll be taking you directly into the chasm, is probably a good thing. And that is the end of chapter 31. So, yeah, interesting chapters. I really am like, I don't know. There's something about what happened with Nissa that's just bugging me. And they get out, it seems okay. So it feels silly to still be nervous about it, but it may just not be what it sounded like at the time. So something's up. Something's up. Anyway, ooh, Dan says, LOL, that has to be a typo. But I don't, Dan typed that a little bit ago, I think, so I'm not even sure what it was that he was referring to. Um, I don't remember what it could be. I don't like anything, nothing's coming to mind that felt like a typo for when Leonis responded to the narrator. Oh, do you think? He says that Scoria was probably supposed to be talking, like that sentence maybe was meant to be in quotation marks. Maybe. I don't know. It's sort of weird because, like, the formatting of novels, it can be kind of sometimes they'll have like the first sentence of every chapter is all caps or in bold or italicized or you know what I mean? Or if it has quotes, the quotes at the end of the first sentence, you'll see the end quotation marks. but the opening quotes aren't there. But I haven't noticed that kind of formatting in this book. So, and maybe it was supposed to be Scorio talking. Like, why would he say the whole city turned off to see them, or turned out to see them off? He wouldn't say the sentence like that, would he? I don't know. Phil, let me know. Since I can just tell Phil to let me know things. Oh boy, I'm going to use this power for good, I swear. All right, I've got to wrap this up. Thank you all again so much for listening, for supporting the show. Thank you to Dan for commissioning these episodes. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.